I'm seeing some familiar names and at times faces. Now, in business schools, we often say it's our responsibility to prepare students for the jobs that don't yet exist. We're admitting that for a variety of reasons, technology being among the most important, that the industries and the jobs are constantly being invented and reinvented in unexpected ways, and that the innovations happening now will have profound implications for the careers of our students, not only as we say, takers of jobs, but also as creators of jobs throughout their careers. And in fact, if Peter Drucker says the best way to predict the future is to create it, what we're saying is the next best way is to learn from the people who are creating the future of jobs. So when it comes to looking for the best people, where do you go? You go to Korn Ferry. And there's no better place to start than Korn Ferry, global leader in organizational consulting and executive search, and our collaborators for this series of conversations about the jobs of the future. I'm Dan LeClaire. I'm CEO of the Global Business School Network, a network of now nearly 130 business schools in more than 50 countries, focused on improving access to quality, locally relevant management education in emerging economies. And this is the first session. I'm pleased to welcome you to the first session of the series of conversations about the jobs that don't yet exist. For the series launch, we're privileged to welcome two special guests, not just one, but two special guests, who are helping organizations to build the workforces of the future, and also helping us at GBSN to identify and connect with the right people to speak with. Grace Chu, I see she's turned on her video. Grace Chu builds the corporate development and talent management programs for boards and executive committees. And she specializes in C-level and board searches that shape the future of the metaphysical world. And by that, we're really focused on where hardware meets software, both, with air, land, and space. I think we'll have a chance perhaps to talk a little bit about that, as well as in the software industry and new energy. Lisa Harrison is a client partner in Korn Ferry's advisory practice, helping clients who are shaping the workforce of the future. She has more than 20 years of experience in organizational consulting and operates across a variety of industries, but has a special affiliation with the healthcare industry and helping companies to build world-class human capital functions in healthcare. Now we're going to jump right in because we have only 30 minutes. I encourage you to post your comments and questions in the chat as we go. But Grace, it's been a pleasure to follow your work at Korn Ferry, but we've known each other for many years, even prior to that, going all the way back to Singapore and your work with Ipsos. And it's been great to have these periodic conversations about your pioneering work. But I want to ask you, just to get us started with an introduction, what does our series topic, the jobs that don't yet exist, what does it mean to a global leader in organizational consulting like Korn Ferry?
Thank you so much, Dan, for the kind introduction. And hi, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Thank you for joining us. So the reason why Dan and I started this series is because through our interactions, we see many trends that are happening in the world with the clients that we work with. For example, if you think about the future of mobility, it used to be cars and aeroplanes, but now we're thinking about autonomous driving, we're thinking about robo-taxis, we are thinking about electric vertical takeoff and landing. In the energy space, we see things like hydrogen, battery storage, companies that are making the transition from the past to the future. In the healthcare sector as well, digital transformation. What does that mean to companies like Kaiser Permanente, like Cigna, etc.? Lisa and myself, we had the opportunity to help some of these companies through the transition, identifying some of the capabilities that they were lacking, and how to fill these gaps, which are the top roles that would make a big difference to the future of these companies. Through this process, we have gotten an insight to what matters, right, and what we can prepare our students for the future, because there's a gap in the workforce. I'll share a statistic with you. In cybersecurity, apparently for every 10 jobs, 9 of them go unfilled. What if we could get our students to think about cybersecurity? And this, by the way, reflects in compensation, right? It's all a game of demand and supply. The same for software engineering. The same for people who are commercializing software business models. All right, so coming from a business school myself, I had a great opportunity to interact with career services as well as my professors and learning about many different industries. But what if we narrowed that information gap through this series? So this is the genesis of this several part series that Dan and I will be organizing with the GSBN team. It's a pleasure to be here today.
Thank you so much, Grace. Lisa, to get us started, we're going to continue to address what we discussed earlier, these 7 trends. But before we get into that, we should talk about the massive elephant in the room, like the last 24 months, right? Can you give us a high level and quick bulleted version of what happened and what are the implications that you've seen over the last 24 months?
Dan, thank you so much. Really, what it boils down to is there's one fact that's really clear here, and that's that power has shifted. And what do we mean by that? Really, we went from organizations to people, and really from profit to that mutual prosperity, and from me to we. And when we say we, what we really mean by that is inclusivity, inclusion. So as organizations, as business leaders, as students, it's really going to be critical that you need to be thinking about organizations are only as good as their employees. And so as we think about that, in order to survive and really survive and thrive, it's really about how do you embrace the future and really think about making work for everyone. And so with that, Dan, there's really 7 key trends that Korn Ferry has, through our research, has identified that are really the trends of the future. And so you see them here. We've got the reinvention and thinking about redesigning to really stay relevant. And we've got scarcity. So surviving the big quit. We know the great resignation is here today. We're seeing it across the news, and organizations are feeling this. Vitality, really thinking about how do organizations and employees and people themselves really beat the burnout and that they're experiencing today. Sustainability, thinking about shaping the future and how do we work smarter, not harder. Individuality, making business really personal and to the core around and connecting to what we really do on a day-to-day basis and what is really going to be meaningful and thrive today. Inclusivity, so really thinking about how do we unleash the power of all and thinking about we all have great things that we bring to the table. What is it that's really going to connect us to one another and think about that inclusivity for all. And then accountability, so really standing by what you do and doing what you say. But we're really going to just focus on a couple of these today, Dan, and my partner here, Grace. We're going to go through, as she shared, some of the key things that we're seeing in the marketplace today as it relates to jobs and organizational capabilities that are needed for the future, and really go from there.
All right, thank you, Lisa. This is great. I don't know if you, Grace and Lisa, have been looking at the chat as we speak, but you'll notice that there is a rather internationally diverse group that's come to join us. And even in the last few postings on the chat, we've seen people from Greece, Portugal. We're looking at Malaysia, South Africa, the UK, Lithuania, I think, Colombia. So as you go through this and you think about the kinds of things that you're doing, I'd love to explore this international diversity with you. But let's start at the beginning. We'll have a conversation. We'll jump around with these 7 trends. But with this reinvention, I used to do a little game, I guess, when I was a professor with my students. I used to try to mash things up a little bit, right? We used to take seemingly unrelated things and bring them together and see and discuss what happens. And if you could tell us a little bit about how these mashups are happening, because this is a big driver, as Grace mentioned in the introduction, about the kinds of jobs that are being created for the future.
Absolutely. And so let's go ahead and just dive right in. So as we kind of think about this, when we think about the mashup and the reinvention, there are really, I think, some key areas here for action that organizations as well as employees are really looking at. And so thinking about how are organizations really being creative and intentional around finding and developing really what are those hot skills today. Thinking about hybrid and work and remote models, being a global organization. I think this is really, critical even for the school, for the business school. As you think about this, Dan, gone are the days where you had to, go into the office every single day. It's really more now around what are the right hybrid or remote work models that are going to be really critical for going forward. I liken it to organizations as well as employees now have a choice, but we go from fishing in a pond to fishing in an ocean as we think about that. And that really ties to that talent scarcity that we're seeing, but also how work is being performed and what organizations are really doing going forward. There's tremendous seismic shifts that are happening when organizations are thinking about roles and thinking about value management and what that looks like going forward. As we think about this, companies are really getting more creative and intentional as we think about what are those hot skills as we go forward. And as we think about that, it's interesting as we think about this, 69% of the world's most admired companies hire their talent based on learning agility and curiosity. While instead of career history, while career history is really important, right? Garnering those skills and experiences are critical. I think what we're finding here though is that learning agility and that curiosity, asking questions is going to be really critical going forward. And you can see here, and Grace has, I think, some really great examples as we look to go forward in relation to what are some of those hottest jobs that we're seeing in the marketplace today. IT specialists, engineers, clinical workers, educators, digital marketers, recruiters. Grace, is there anything you'd want to add to that in relation to what you're seeing in the marketplace today?
Yeah, Lisa, thank you. And I think another thing to add is data science, right? So across all, if you think about the different functions of each organization, from finance, HR, operations, supply chain, we talk about marketing, right? At the core of every single function today, it's data science. Look at all the job specs that you would see on, say, LinkedIn jobs, right? They're hiring people for the future, not of the past. And in terms of learning agility that Lisa pointed to, it's also a lot about growth mindset. In some of the profiles that I will be showing to you later, I've had the chance to interact with most of these individuals. And what stood out for me is that they were very open to learn. And they have this mindset where, hey, you know what? I don't know much about this, but I can leverage what I've already built, the knowledge I've already built through my previous experience to bring it to the next company. That's what we call a next practice, right? A best practice in an industry that could become a next practice in another. So with that, we'll hand the time back to you, Lisa.
Great, thanks, Grace. I think what, just building upon, when we think about what are some of those key skills and capabilities as we're looking forward, we've done a bit of research in relation to this space. And what we're finding are, here's just a couple of examples of some really strategic and significant roles as we look to go forward. And it builds upon what Grace is saying around that data science piece. But you'll see here the role that data curator. right? And so now, is this going to be a role that you'll see, and if you were to go out and look at job postings and look at that, not specifically, but what we're calling this is these are individuals. So if you can imagine yourself, right, and you're thinking about where you're at in your space, and you're learning and you're growing as a student, and even as a business leader, these are really individuals who can take the large amounts of data and really analyze it for those key trends, information, and apply it to those really unique business challenges and explain how to improve results as a result of the information learned. So you can see on the right side there, what are some of those key attributes and responsibilities. I think what's important here in thinking about the data scientists, the data curators, is thinking about, how do you take the data, and then how do you derive the insights and the implications from it? And what we're finding in this space today and working with organizations is that is a real challenge that organizations have. So as you think about your career and you think about how do you set yourself apart, is having that ability to really be able to derive those insights and report on it, as well as then really understand, okay, what are the implications of this for the organization on quality? What are the intersection points are going to be really important. I think the next one is also another really critical one as well. Is you think about that consumer ethnographers, right? And so we think about this as a really diverse individual who has unique insights to really to a community that's improving consumer experience, from a health system or a payer, or you think about the retail space, whatever it may be. But this person must have credibility in the community and the ability to align the community needs and products and service offerings to the organization. What we're finding is that this is a really critical role as you think about experience, you think about social equity within and building really that sense of community within which you serve. And this is really understanding and having a deep understanding of those consumer segments based on, various different diversity components of diversity. So again, thinking about that, from that lens is going to be important. Grace, anything you would add here?
Yeah, Lisa, I think these points are extremely relevant in today's world, right? And maybe I want to zoom in on the last point, business process and model rethink, right? And one of the profiles that I'll show you later, it's customer service, right? Customer service has had a reputation for not being the sexiest job in the world, right? It's kind of a thankless job, right? People call you only to complain. But now organizations are flipping this around, right? With this consumer-centric model where, before you even call some of these companies, when you're dialing their number, the phone is ringing on their end. Imagine that they have your phone number. They already can pull up your profile, right? For example, iRobot does that. Right, so companies are thinking about their business process and model, right? Not just to reduce burnout, right? To increase their margins, right, by reducing costs, but also thinking about, hey, this is also about top line growth, right? So this consumer centricity is playing out in many of these roles. And then for data, of course, it's very, very applicable to every single role that we work on these days, right? From the CEO to the HR manager to the finance operator. Now, every single organization is now being forced to think about data and its impact. And as Lisa rightly mentioned, it's not just data for the sake of data, but what is the insight that you get from that? And that's a lot of, oftentimes, the struggle.
Can I interject, Lisa and Grace? One of the things that strikes me with this conversation is that at times in business schools, we often talk about the poets and the quants as if they're different people. And it sounds to me like moving forward, many of us have to be both, right? We have to be both literate and widely read and articulate, but we also need to be at least competent, perhaps excelling with data and with quantitative methods. But this is a good time, since Grace, you brought up the customer service. There's a question from Almira in the chat about what's happening to company sizes, but she goes on and asks about, are these companies growing with these new roles, or are they coming at the expense of old jobs? And in particular, is it driven a lot by this AI and automation? Speaking of customer service, right? I don't remember the last time I called in and actually spoke to a person. Can you talk to us a little bit about where you see jobs actually disappearing, not just being created?
And Grace, can I jump in and take this one to start with, and then I'll turn it over to you for thoughts?
Absolutely. Go ahead, Lisa.
Great. I'm actually, that's a great question. And thank you for posing that. You know, what we're seeing across the industry right now is in working with a number of organizations around what's being called the digital transformation. And so to the exact point around how is AI, machine learning, et cetera, really impacting the work and impacting what used to be jobs, more administrative type tasks, roles, and how is technology then being leveraged to then be able to essentially do those, what I'll call those more administrative tasks and roles. And so Dan, the point is that yes, skills are being, employees are needing to be upskilled. So when we think about, you know, those administrative, more administrative tasks, yes, they are being automated by machine learning, AI, etc. And so that's, I think, where comes into play around where we're finding organizations are needing to really upskill in relation to more advisory services. So yes, they want to have that still that human intentional touch, but it's going to be, the key word there is intentional. And so, you know, and when you do actually talk to someone on the phone and or even in a bot type setting, it is going to be more from a consultative lens and perspective. And even from a sales perspective and thinking about sales, it's coming more from a consultative or advising perspective. Hence where the data comes in really important, because you have to be able to derive the insights and the implications from the data to be then that consultant and be that advisor to that consumer that you're speaking with.
That's great, Lisa. That's really, really great, right? And from an industry level, I think the answer to that question as well is it depends, right? And which industry we're talking about. The most automation we have seen is in the industrial world, right? So, for example, you know, the role of the forklift operator. I mean, why can't a machine do that, right? It's low value, low skill, right? So we are seeing these kinds of jobs disappear. Now the question is, what do you do with these guys then? Right, as Lisa said, we upskill them courses. Maybe, you know, they learn something about coding, right? They become software engineers, or not. Maybe they take on another role. Lisa's team, they do a lot of work around job similarities, right? So moving from a customer service operator to maybe a marketing professional. Right, these are some of the jobs that have very transferable skills. In several sectors, we're seeing, you know, it also depends on the function, right? So if you think about the agriculture industry, and we work with some agriculture technology clients, we think about farmers and knowing that, hey, we've run out of feed, right? Like for our cows and our hogs. Now, what did they used to do? They used to take a drum and hit it on the feed bin, and they would guess, oh, okay, we must be running 20% low. Now with hardware and software combined, right, the farmers now have access to tools like data analytics, like telling them that, hey, it's time for an order. And guess what? The machine automates this order. Right? So it doesn't just remove jobs, it improves the task efficiency, right? So the farmers can then spend their time on other tasks as opposed to thinking about whether their feed is running low and when they should be ordering these things. In some cases, for example, our industry, especially in you know, industries that require a human touch, like hospitality, HR, you know, we're seeing data and analytics, artificial intelligence as smarter ways to operate. Right, the access to data that we get, it's helping us in being more efficient and being better consultants to our clients. right? But as of now, we think we're here to stay. And maybe in 5 years' time, the situation could be different. Yeah, but I think, the answer is it depends on which industry. Some industries are going faster than the others.
Well, let's stick with the chat if we can, because I know if we go back to those 7 trends, there's a lot in there about, as you put it, Lisa, the big quit, the great resignation, talked a great deal about, there we go, inclusivity, personalization and individuality. And all of this is related to this motivation. Could you talk with us in response to this question in the chat from Birute? How do you see the transformation of employee motivation related to work package?
I think what we're seeing here with this, Dan, and it's a great question, is it's all about choice. So it's a combination. And when you think about these trends, it's a combination of many of them. But I think what we see here with employers, but as well as with employees and students, is the bottom line is you have a choice. And so as you're thinking about going forward, and what I counsel organizations on is, what's your value proposition? So as you think about what's the bill of goods that you are selling to an employee, right? And what are you really delivering on? So culture plays a big part in this. And then on the flip, so as an organization, working with them around what is it the culture of today and then the culture of tomorrow that you're trying to really produce here. But then also thinking about, as a student, is thinking through what is it that you value most. So as you think about these work trends and you think about inclusivity, you think about individuality, sustainability, what is it that you really value as a person, and what's going to be a really great fit for you? Because ultimately, we all have choices around where we can land today and where in the direction that we want to go and the journey we want to go on. I think that, it's all about, for me, how do we make sure that that we're really creating the right match, right, from an employer to an employee. Grace?
Yeah, and as Lisa said, it's all about choice, right? And this is a change scenario. In every change scenario, you get about 40% who are going to be on your side, right? They're going to go with the change because they feel that they want to be part of it. Now, there'll always be that 50% that's sitting on the fence, right? So it's then the scale of the leader. And this, by the way, applies to vaccination too, right? If you see the data in each of the countries in the world, like 40% were on board at an early stage, 50% sat on the fence and waited, right? They waited to see if any of their peers, suffered from the vaccine, right? Or maybe even, died. That's a bigger sphere, right? And then the 10% would always say, hey, you know what? We're not doing this, right? That's where you see attrition. Yeah, or they'll sit it on the company, and then at some point they will either move in terms of roles within the company or they'll leave. Right. So I think this applies to every change scenario as we see the jobs changing as well, right? And then it's also again the leaders, right? How are they creating a low risk for the employees to be able to raise their hand, that 50%, to say, hey, we're coming with you.
I often hear in some conversations I have with companies, much more often, it seems today, just like we talk about customer experience, we're often talking about employee experience, right? It's this, how do we create environments in which the experience of employees, and this is something that's emphasized throughout, how do we build unique experience that are tailored to the needs and wants of individuals, and how do we capture that in moving jobs forward? I think this is very interesting, the types of questions that we're seeing popping in. But I'm gonna play off this for a bit, and Lisa, I want to give you a chance to talk a little bit about the profiles with Grace, because we talked about these 7 trends, and I want to give you the space to do that before we close out with a question that'll come back to Angus. We're going to try to draw this back to the individual in the school in response to Angus's question. But before we do that, let's talk about these profiles.
Thank you, Dan. So today I bring a profile, Jane Smith. Right, if you think, let's look at 10 years ago in 2010. So Jane was at Apple overseeing watch operations. So really the procurement of different parts for the watch at Apple. Now, Waymo, I don't know if you guys are familiar with Waymo. Waymo is a self-driving company. They create a software stack that can be embedded into cars so that they become robotaxis. This was a spin-off from Google. Right, so if you think about Apple versus Waymo, they're almost exact opposites, right? Apple is all about volume, high volume, low mix, and Waymo is all about low volume, high mix. Right, but if you think about the skills of Jane that she learned at Apple, right, creating the future of mobility, right, mobility because the Apple Watch could connect to different devices, right, influencing and negotiating with suppliers, co-creation. For Apple, they're creating something new, right, that didn't exist. They had to work with suppliers to say, hey, we're thinking about this. Can you be partnering with us to co-create? It's an ecosystem play. It's all about partnerships, right? And it's the same at Waymo. When you're creating something new that's a robo-taxi, right, with the software that doesn't exist and the hardware components that make that happen, right? Now, what is the delta is the software and hardware understanding, right? You need to have some kind of technical understanding, which is so important in each industry vertical. And agility, right? So Jane is extremely agile, right? Comes with a growth mindset. Like, hey, you know what? I'm not afraid. I don't know this, but I'm not afraid to learn. Right? As jobs change all the time, right? Increasingly so with this disruption in the industry, you know, to reinvent, it's about thinking about best practices that become a next practice, right? Mobility in the Apple Watch context that become a next practice at Waymo, right? Using that a different lens to look at problems. Now, the next profile, we'll go on to the next one. I was going to talk about, actually, let's go back one slide, Lisa. Thank you. To talk about the mobility industry. Right, at business school, I don't know about you, but what I learned about was, I remember the classic case study of partnerships, joint ventures. It was Nissan and I think it was Mitsubishi. Right, so coming out of business school, I knew about Nissan, I knew about Ford, Toyota. But the industry is so much bigger than that. Right, so this is where, you know, business schools, you know, need to be exposing students, right? It's a platform to reduce that, or rather to increase information transparency, to say, hey, you know what? There are other companies besides the automotive OEMs, right? Like autonomous driving companies, autonomous logistics, autonomous trucking companies, electric vehicles, and even on the right-hand side, urban mobility. Right, the Ubers, the Lyfts, the Vias of the world, and eVTOL companies, electric vertical takeoff and landing. And if you think about then, you know, the compensation levels, right? We see those on the left actually getting a lot higher compensated than those on the right or in the middle. When you think about the companies in the middle, they're the more traditional ones, right? So that is something to say as well about where the industry is moving. Right. And the next profile, Lisa, thank you. So the next profile is about sustainability, right? So the topic that we discuss a lot at the firm these days is ESG, environment, society, and governance. Organizations that are trying to impact society, especially through climate change. And you think about the new energy sources, battery storage and supply chain. It is so valuable to organizations to now attract talent who know something about battery storage. Right. And what is important about battery storage as well that Lisa and I learned is the software that comes with it. Right, so there's a question that I saw in the chat. It's how to best introduce these next horizon capabilities at the school level. Right, I don't know if this is counterintuitive, but what if every single business school student came out of business school and knew, had, you know, at least a high level understanding of what AI is, right, data science is, and what it could do for organizations. Or even at the CEO level, we're seeing top teams now seek digital fluency, right, to be knowledgeable about these topics, to talk to their employees about it, right? Because if they're leading the change, they need to know something about that. right? And then ecosystem and partnerships in the hydrogen world, we know that it's not just you, right? It's about financing, it's about governments, it's about your suppliers for different parts of the hydrogen ecosystem, it's about your customers, right? And it's an investment by all of these parts of the ecosystem to make it happen. And then software, cybersecurity has a big part to play in energy. If you think about the disruptions that happen in America because of cybersecurity attacks, or what if the senior management were digitally fluent and they all knew something about cybersecurity and were acting on this earlier? So these are some of the skills that we think will impact the energy industry. Now next, and the final case and final profile is a person from the customer service role, right? Starting at JP Morgan Chase, working in financial services, insurance, and moving to Amazon. Right? At Amazon, the philosophy is, hey, for every call that customers don't make to us, right, we will save money because we don't need to hire people to sit in a call center to pick up these calls. So Amazon designed a system where it's self-help. Right? So you think about vitality, it's about reducing burnout. Right? How can we reduce burnout by customer service operators who get countless numbers of calls by making our systems even smarter than they are? And then individuality is where it plays out. Dan mentioned that he hasn't spoken to anyone on the phone. Right? Artificial intelligence is one thing that they use. So before you even get to the operator, they already know what your request is about. Right? They have your phone number. They know what's the product you bought. And then using that data to help to find errors, right? So if you, in a robotics company like iRobot, right? Apparently they know just by the number of calls that they get, like if there's a particular model which has a defect, right? And then they route this to the engineers to address this defect. Right? Think about what this does for your business in terms of saving costs and improving your product so that you can sell more of it. So these are some of the trends that we're seeing across different roles. Of course, there could be many more, right? But at a high level, we thought these would be some meaningful examples for you.
Thanks, Grace. I think this is a great lead-in, as we think about, it kind of closing out here for today and kind of leaving it for that food for thought, as we go forward, what are some of the industries shaping the future, undergoing the change and the lack of the talent? I think that, Grace, you did a great job, right, of articulating some of those high level roles and what that looks like and what the journey looked like for those individuals, and really kind of highlighting, as you think about the kind of those new skills that are needed. I think it's great that we have faculty and the business leaders on the line today and asking great questions, as well as the students thinking about, okay, how does this then really apply in the business in the business world, especially in today's world? And then really asking that last question: how can I, my students, maximize impact and equity? So really thinking about that as well. Dan, any last closing thoughts?
Oh, thank you so much, Lisa and Grace. This has been spectacular. Grace, now those profiles, I understand those are real people, right? And these are the kinds of people that we'll be talking about and actually bringing in throughout the series. So we welcome everyone to come back and tell your friends about the kinds of conversations we'll have about these jobs that are being created as we speak. Now, Grace also began to answer Angus's question quite well, but I wanted her, Lisa, if you want to use the sort of the last word to also address that question about how do we introduce these horizontal capabilities at the school level? Just again, as a final word, I'm going to thank Grace right now, and I'll thank you after, Lisa, and close the meeting.
Absolutely. I think it's making sure, as you think about that relevance, for me, it's relevancy, right? And understanding what that relevancy is in the marketplace and really begin to integrate it in. And so I think it's these types of sessions, Dan, right, where we're talking and bringing those real life examples to bear and understanding where we are today, and really then being able to incorporate it in. I saw in the chat as well that potentially students want the old marketing, right, programs versus they're wanting thinking about, here's the new data, what the new marketeer looks like for the future. And so, it really actually brings to bear for me, Dan, when I think about this, is it's almost starting young, back at you thinking about middle school and high schoolers, right? And helping them also understand where are we going in the world today as it relates to what those needs are going to be, and almost starting younger to be able to introduce what is data, because it's here to stay and it's only going to improve. So, as I think about that, I think about it, it's a multifaceted approach, right? It's thinking about, okay, how do we educate our even younger people, right, around thinking about jobs for the future, but then also incorporating that and staying well connected with businesses from a school perspective and faculty to stay relevant.
Thank you so much, Lisa. And I'm going to see Grace in future sessions. I understand our next session is going to focus on mobility, and in particular air mobility, which is going to be fascinating and how that's changing. And a session after that on agricultural technology, which I think many of us, especially around the world, will find extremely important as we go. Grace, Lisa, thank you so much for spending time with us to have this conversation. And we look forward to seeing everyone at future sessions about the jobs that don't yet exist. Thank you so much for joining us, and we'll look forward to seeing you soon.
Thank you so
Thank
much
you all.
everyone. Bye-bye. Have a great day.